Alarms based on performance are based, as I mentioned, on thresholds. So thresholds can be static. This is like a standard high water mark or low water mark or even both. And these are looked at across that time period. So when you see the edit screen for a threshold, you'll always see that time period indicator. And time period tells us how long to average the data across before comparing it to those values. So the idea is that in order to limit false alerts, maybe I don't want to get notified every time my SQL server hits 100% CPU, but if it stays there for 20 minutes or 15 minutes, then something might be stuck and I need to go look into it. So time periods give you a way to do that kind of extra processing on performance related stats to avoid and limit the number of false alarms that you get. Alarms, again, are only sent when you're above the critical threshold for the time period as a running average. So for things like in percentages, for example, the closer your threshold is to 100%, the less likely you are to have a single spike that pulls the running average up high enough to reflect that alarm. Thresholds are checked every 5 minutes, the same interval as what we're collecting the data. So we're always checking kind of the most recent data. So if we're running a 15-minute average, every 5 minutes it runs the last running 15 minutes and compares that to the threshold values. The second kind of thresholds are anomalies, and anomaly thresholds are configured as a percentage deviation. So this is basically looking at another time period. For example, looking at rate of change is the immediately previous time period and saying if this 15 minutes is different than the last 15 minutes by more than this percent, that's an anomaly. But you can also compare it to previous date and time. Like in this example, we're looking at the same period 7 days ago. So we'd be looking at, what happened at 10 a.m. last Monday versus 10 a.m. this Monday, and kind of looking at the regular cycle of data to compare those. You can also look at the time period, which serves the same purpose as in thresholds, and it prevents sudden spikes from triggering inappropriate alarms. Now, one thing to remember about anomalies is that when you're configuring percentage anomalies, you have to be careful of very low values, because if the baseline value for something is like 0.001, 1,000% increase still means it's only at 1. So you have to be a little bit aware of it when you configure that. In OmniCenter 10, this is changing slightly so that it's a little bit easier to set up, and it can be run a little more automatically. You don't need as much background on what the data is doing to set a rational value. And it'll also look at longer time frames. In OmniCenter 10, it'll go back and look at the last 8 time periods instead of just the immediately previous one.